If you take your seats, we'll be in business with Steve Smith. Let me try this a second time. Here is Steve Smith.
Well, it's an honor to be here. I'm amazed that we are here, not wearing masks and all that sort of thing. And although I don't know why George put me up against Hamlet, so I got to follow that. There will be no bells and there will be no smells. It won't be as animated. And it's going to be a little bit tedious because we're going to get into some technical things about ammunition in the American Revolution. George asked me to put this together. Actually, I was preparing to go out for a week of work, and George called me on a week, a little less than, over a week ago, and said, "What do you got?" And I said, "I don't have anything on Princess Marion, but we've been at 96 for a couple of years and doing some excavations there." So this is partly a show and tell, and partly a presentation that was given at the Society for American Historical Archaeology. So it's got some archaeological technical details that hopefully will not put you to sleep. If it was a young audience, I teach at the college, and I found out by moving my classes to about this period of time, you know, they're here and they're all lively at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon because they don't get up until like 11, right? So. But for me, it's been rough to teach it about anywhere from 2 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like my downtime. So I hope this won't be too much downtime for you all. In May of 2018 and May of 2019, my organization, the South Carolina Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology, conducted field schools teaching undergraduate students excavation techniques. These are all budding archaeologists at the Star Corps. The National Park Service gave us funding to look at the area around National Historic Site, 96 National Historic Site, and we chose part of the battle of the Star Corps to get into, and amazingly they allowed us to get in there and look at it. And so we're pretty excited. We did ground penetrating radar. We did taught the students to dig holes using trowels and shovels and that sort of thing. And we also did systematic metal detecting across the battlefield. And amazingly, even though it has been heavily hit by relic collectors prior to it becoming a National Historic Site, which was only in 1976, there was an amazing amount of material there, as you'll see. I'm not going to go through the history. I'm not going to give you a real detailed history of 96. Larry Babbitts, I understand, is working on a book going through the pension applications as only he can do, and teasing out facts that I'm amazed that he's finding out about the battle. So we hope we can look towards that probably in a couple of years. Just as a brief overview, though, we'll let you know that in the spring and summer of 1781, that Nathaniel Greene and his subordinates pursued a very successful campaign to eject the British and their loyalist allies from the many posts in interior South Carolina. Nearly all the British posts seen here were either captured or evacuated during the campaign. On May 22, 1781, Greene's army began the siege of the post in 96. By May, 96 had become a formidable defensive position on par with Camden. The British commander under Lieutenant Colonel John Harris Kruger had constructed a palisade around the entire village. He had outer defenses, including Holmes Fort to the northwest, a battery to the north overlooking the stream, which was the main source of water for the village, and of course a formidable star-shaped fort on the southeast side of the village. And I think this artist's rendition is fairly accurate of what it probably looked like, although of course they probably would not have been camping inside there. And this was all linked by a system of trenches, which you can still see today when you visit the site. In a move that remains controversial even today, Greene and his engineer, Thaddeus Kosciuszko, decided to lay siege to the village by focusing on the Star Fort, which of course did not make a lot of sense, attacking the strongest position, but that's what they did. Throughout the siege, they dug these classic Vauban siege trenches. They constructed artillery batteries. They built a rifle tower. They constructed and dug a mine to try to blow up the fortification, which failed. But all this continued for a 28-day siege. On June 18th, the Americans had made their way all the way to the fort's ditch, and were in the process of planning an assault when they heard that Francis Lord Walden was on his way to relieve the British command there, and Greene decided to go ahead and risk a direct assault against the Star Fort before falling back, and the attack met with a bloody repulse. Greene broke off the siege the following day, and the British then burned and evacuated the site. Of course, ironically, Kruger had orders to destroy and abandon 96 before Greene had gotten there. So if it weren't for the Americans' efficient system of capturing messengers and destroying messages, they probably would have been out of there and could have avoided a major battle. In any case, they burn it, and you will see that they did a thorough job of destroying both the forts and the village, and then left. In 1976, there's a siege, this is a famous picture that you all have in Bass's book and everywhere else has been seen. This is the main assault in which Kruger wisely detached people out of the back of the fort and came around both sides as the American assault, so that it was flanked on either side. Major battle. But there's some interesting things there. You'll see the hook, the Continental soldier there trying to hook a British soldier and bring him down. And you don't see any spears, but you will see some soon. There they are, the British burning and abandoning 96. Today, it's a National Historic Site, as you all know. Park Service conducted excavations there to reveal the trenches. They did not actually excavate any of the trenches, but they cleared off all of the, and followed the tops of the trenches so that they are reconstructed, sort of the shadow of these trenches that were excavated by Americans during the siege. And then this is, you can see the Star Fort and the visitor's path there. So, as I noted, we conducted 2 field schools in 2018 and 2019. And our main purpose was to teach undergraduate anthropology students. It wasn't to do major excavations. And that actually was very much to our advantage because since we were teaching and we did not have some sort of major goal, we could really kind of do what we wanted to do at a very slow pace while we taught people, and we didn't have a quota of how many units we had to excavate or anything like that. So we could work magic slowly. And our research goal was simply to find out if there was anything left of the fort and how much of that archaeology remained. This is the LiDAR map of the Star Fort from a close-up, and this shows you some of the excavations, and you can see that we tried to investigate the center of the fort and distribute units across the fort to just about hit every part of the fort to sample it, so we could come back hopefully someday and know where to go. So we've got the center of the fort. This is the main attack focus of the American attack. Put some units right there. There was an artillery position, and we also investigated 2 other salients and tried to sample this one also. And then this is the shadow of the well. So we put some units right beside the well, which because the dirt was still there from the excavations, and you know that's like candy to an archaeologist, because what that means is that they had, during the siege, they threw the dirt on top of the ground, the very ground that they were walking on, so that we had a sealed context, and we were hoping that that would be quite lucrative. It wasn't. Let's see. Not advancing. The lights are on. I think their batteries are dying there. Nope. George is not here. George is so excited he left. Yeah, it's on. It's because it's not. I think it's.
Your lights on the ceiling.
Yeah, and it's not. I think the battery's dead.
You're using the pointer, the green light, instead of the advanced light.
Right, but the green light's stuck on.
Okay, tell me.
I can go over there and flip it.
I can advance it from here, can I?
I can do it. Okay, go ahead. Next. So we mostly excavated 1x2s, 2x2s, and we work in meters. So we'll talk about a 2x2 unit and 2x unit. Oh. Does that advance it? Oh, I don't need this. Yeah, I need to be able to advance it actually. All right, go back to one. Okay. Yeah. There you go. All right. So right in the center of the fort, we found a major feature, as you can see here. We've got the dark soils there in the lower over here is part of the feature that has not been completely excavated. That's where it's been excavated. These are both the drawing and the photograph of what we found. 2 barrel bands, one complete and circular, and another one has been flattened out for some purpose. We found 2 cream. Go ahead and advance and go the other way. Don't retreat. Advance. Charge. Still going backwards.
Hey Steve, when you talk about a barrel band, you're talking about like from a historic?
I am talking about a barrel without the wooden staves. There we go. All right, so you have, here's some of the artifacts we found in this feature. We've got royal creamware mold pattern soup plates, almost complete. We've got tons of buckshot. We've got nails, which are probably from storage. Most of them were these J-type nails that were used as for storage boxes. We have pig bone, cow bone, and various ceramics from the correct period. These are various gun parts that were thrown in and found mostly from French Charleville weapons, and of course the brown vest. Go ahead. So what we actually had was we don't think it was a trash pit, we think it was a mud hole where they were actively using during the siege. These ceramics, you noticed, were not damaged. They weren't burned or anything like that. And there were other areas where we had burnt ceramics. And so there's no indication that this was done after the siege, but during the siege, they were sitting there and they were doing processing. We had lots of melted lead. They were molding bullets and hiding behind the traverse, which was dug in the late part of the siege. So this was more likely just trash that was on the ground that had been pushed into a mud hole during the siege. The second unit we're looking at here is the one that was in the salient closest to the American assault. And here you can see burning from the post-abandonment of the fort. We had a collection of American iron canister or K-shot. These were fired at the British and they collected in one corner. And a spear point, which was used during the siege. There's Mackenzie's Strictures has a interesting appendix in it that describes the siege of '96 in excellent detail. And it talks about the commander of the fort, Green, without the E, ordered local blacksmiths to prepare siege spears so they could be used against the Americans in case they attacked. And we found two of these spears. The one we found here, as you can see, is bent. And it was stuck vertical in the ground, and probably it was broken. They stuck it into the ground and then it broke off the haft. But you can see that these are not something that were massively manufactured. We have, I think there's some pictures of it when it's been conserved. This was when it was found it just came out of the ground. But they're hand forged. They're individually. We had two of them that they don't look alike. But so a blacksmith was making this on the slide very quickly in preparation for the siege. Next slide. Okay, we put units. This is in the northeastern corner where we spent a lot of time, both because we had students and were working very slow, but also because we got into extremely complex stratigraphy. And here you're looking at the remnants of either the firing step or the revet. The firing step would be a platform for the people inside the fort to be able to step up and get high enough to be able to shoot down on any assailants. And the revetment would be in this case, a series of posts placed very close together, and then horizontal logs nailed to those vertical posts to hold back dirt from the earthen parapet or the fort. And you can see it's burnt. So they did a very thorough job. I mean, if you're trying to abandon a place, you might start something and leave and do what you can do, and that's fine. But everywhere we went, we found this kind of burning. So that means that they had to get this stuff burning. So that would take a lot of effort to get the entire wood part of this fort burning, because there wasn't that much wood. Okay, all right. Some interesting things in the southwestern quadrant. We opened up another unit and found similar stuff, but we also found a cluster of 3 6-pounder cannonballs together. They were all American. We will talk about that, why we know they're American in a little bit. They were found in this unit here. These are the divots from where they were. They didn't land there when they were fired there. More than likely the British piled them up there during the siege. We also found a couple of examples of, well, here's a one ball right there. We found a couple of examples of complete American cartridges, or cartridges for the French Charleville. The Americans generally fired a musket ball and 3 buckshot. So here you're seeing, we found a musket ball on top of 3 buckshot. Of course, the paper cartridge and the gunpowder have gone away, but this is what remains. We thought that was pretty cool. And the reason why these are French and not British is because, of course, the British had captured large stores of French Charlevilles in Charleston, and they were issued to the Loyalists. And these were all Loyalist units in this, within the fort. So they were certainly firing, they were armed with the French Charleville. Okay, try one more slide. All right. So yeah, I was talking about the dirt that was piled up inside the fort when they dug the well. And again, what we wanted to do was to see if we could find the living surface of the British when they were there. There it is right there. And this is all dirt from inside the well. And of course, as they go, this is called reverse stratigraphy from archaeology. The oldest deposits are on top in this case because they're the deepest and they've been piled up on top of earlier shallower soils. Unfortunately, although that's the 1780 surface, we only found a British neck stock, collar stock. That's all we found, unfortunately, which was really disappointing. Now, you can see we just did these little units. So again, we weren't trying to excavate the entire fort. We were just doing these little windows and teaching the students how to do things. And so as a result, we never got a big picture of any one area. We just sampled things. But of course, we can tell you right now that there's plenty of archaeology to do inside the Head Start Fort. Okay, next. All right. That was the show and tell part. Now we're going to get into some details on the different kinds of artillery we found. The first thing we want to talk about is the iron 6-pound cannon balls from 6-pounders siege guns, and there's an example there. This is an American gun here, and this is a 19th century example of what it would have looked like if it had been in the back of a artillery carriage. So you've got your straps holding it down, you've got a fixed to a sabot, and then there would have also been a cartridge or cotton bag of gunpowder, which would constitute a fixed round. Now, the British had no 6-pounders, so all of these 6-pound cannon balls were obviously American. Nevertheless, we found both American and British 6-pound balls, and rather than only American. So obviously the Americans were using captured material during the siege. Next slide. Okay, this is an example of a 6-pound British ball, and of the 9 6-pounder, the gun is a 6-pounder, and the cannonball weighs 6 pounds. So if I go back and forth, that's what we're kind of talking about. So we found we found 9 of these cannonballs. And more than likely there are many, many more there, buried deeply into the side of the parapet. The British balls look like this, and we can tell them the differences. Go ahead and move on to the next slide. Yeah, okay, this is a 12-pound ball found at Dunbar's camp in the expedition at Braddock's Defeat in Pennsylvania back in 1755. But this gives you an example of the 2 diagnostic features of British artillery. But there's actually 3. One is the British broad arrow that began to be put on British ammunition in the late 17th century and moving forward, and they still use the British broad arrow on prison uniforms. It just marks government property. The other characteristic of British cannonballs in this era is the depressed sprue area there, and this concave surface is detached, is part of how they detached it from the sprue after it was formed, and they would take the time to polish these balls so that none of the sprue would be beyond the diameter of the ball. And the other characteristic that you can't really see here unless you see a lot of these is how well made it is. You can see it's completely smooth. There are very few concavities or missing parts, shall we say, of these British balls. Next slide. All right, so we compare that then with what we have below. And what we have below is the American balls, which are, as you can see, more roughly made. They're not completely formed. There's often casting bubbles in them. Let's move on to the next slide, I think. Yeah, okay, there's American. There's a comparison between the 12-pound and a 3-pound ball. Excuse me, that's a 6-pound cannonball beside a 3-pound. It's a slightly distorted picture. It looks like an oval shape, but they are actually round. And this gives you a comparison between what the British had, were 3-pound balls inside the fort. And we did not find any in the exterior of the fort. We haven't been able to find any of this. They'd be about 2 inches in diameter, whereas the British balls would be 3.5 inches. We think we know where we can find these, and if we ever get a chance to go back, now that we've kind of hit the process of elimination. Okay, let's go on to the American. Here we go. There's our 6-pound American shot, and you can see there the bolt seams. That's another characteristic of many American balls, are the distinctive bolt seams. Next slide. And here you can see the concavities we were talking about. You can also see that the 2 hemispheres of these balls are offset slightly. That's the way they were. They just were quickly and poorly formed. And because they used an inferior, probably less ferrous materials to build these, to construct these balls, you're getting these flaky, for lack of a better term, that's not the correct term, that's the only one I think of right now. They're flaky, you can see in this one to the extreme left. Okay, next slide. All right, so here's the distribution of the 6-pound cannonballs found in the American shot, that is the American-made shot, is in blue, and you can see the concentration along the western wall there, right? See, that would be the wall towards the siege. In fact, you can see the siege trench there in the upper left corner. And then there's 3 cannonballs that were were collected together probably during the siege. And then the British balls there in the rear, these were all fired by the Americans. at the British. So it's captured rounds. Okay, so we also found American 6-pounder case shot canister. This is an example of the different types of iron shot. We had a total of 14, and they're about 1.2 inches in diameter. They're most likely actually they're most certainly from 6-pounder cannon. The British ordnance called for a much smaller round of about 0.87 inches with 56 balls to the round, which is, you can see on the figure to the left. So to the left, you'd see us looking down on a standard case shot, and then the 27 is the standard American case shot, both being fired out of 6-pounder cannonballs. And then the example to the right is just an example of what that would have looked like, but it's a 19th century example. Okay, so here's the distribution of American case shot, and you can see again it's focused on that where we expect it to be, right there where the American assault. So that area had been pounded by artillery pretty heavily before the assault began. It's pretty obvious, and a lot of this was found. That little cluster there in the salient here. This was where we found heavy burning again. So this stuff was all churned up and inside to burn for afterwards. Next. Okay. This is called language, and what it is anything. You could take any bar stock, you could take nails. If you ran out of case shot, you didn't have any more 6-pound balls to fire, you could always get some iron somewhere and load it in the cannon and shoot it out, and it would be just as lethal as that case shot. And so we found examples of those. These are just bar stock that have been broken, iron scrap, and put down the barrel of the American cannon and fired at the British. And that again, it can be any kind of material that you want to use that would survive a flight, being fired out of a cannon. Next, this is the distribution of that language, and in green. We've only found 3 examples. Next. Here's a comparison of British case canister that was fired out of the fort at the Americans, in comparison to American. Again, you can see how well made even the little case shot are British case shot compared to American case shot, which has got mold seams and everything else. Next. Okay, there we go. And go ahead, continue. And there's our distribution of British case shot. The blue dot is the only example we found of lead case shot at 96. John Allison mentioned there was plenty of it at Battle of Beaufort. Here, it didn't seem like they used very much of it at all. But that doesn't necessarily represent a true distribution in terms of quantities fired out of the fort, obviously. We were only able to sample certain areas of the battlefield using metal detectors. Next. And there's an example of what case shot looks like. You can tell it pretty easily by the concatenations of being fired out of a cannon. What's that word, John? Facets. I like facets better. All right. Next. Okay, there was no howitzers fired at 96 during the siege of 96. Next slide. But here's an example of a 12-pound shell fragment and an example of the 5.5 shell fragment. So we have two pieces of cannonball that would have been filled with gunpowder that would have been fired out of howitzers at 96 that we were able to find. We don't know how they got there. The 5.5 was found inside the fort, so it most certainly was fired during the siege. The 12-pound example was found outside the fort, between the fort and the village. Larry Babbitts, in his research, claims he has a pension application by someone who says that they brought large guns, which he's assuming is 12-pound howitzers. I read the pension application. It's pretty vague, and I'm not convinced yet, but he's the one that convinced me, if he thinks that they're there. But in any case, there's no history, there's no documentation of any howitzers being fired at 96. And they would have been perfectly acceptable and a very effective weapon, because obviously you could fire over walls. So it would have been something to have if the Americans had had it. Next. Oh, this is my field crew. These are all students, except for Jim Legg there behind me, and archaeologists and volunteers. On the last day, we're all pretty muddy, but we've all got something in our hands that represents what we're doing. And in the Shameless Commerce Department, I would like to announce that we have another book coming out here in the spring with a